Good day, Ma'am Reese. I'm Jesreel Tasic from BSN English 3B, and my topic for today is exploring point of view in narrative fiction. So, this unit is designed to explore further the concept of point of view by building an observation and offers the opportunity to develop some practical work around the key interpersonal features which serve to mark out psychological point of view in narrative. So first is modality and style. So the interpersonal function, as term itself suggests, is about how we orientate, shape, and measure our utterances as discourse. So, this function is expressed principally by the grammatical system of modality, which is that part of language which allows us to attach expressions of belief, attitude, and obligation to what we say and write. So the interpersonal function refers to the grammatical choices that enables speakers to enact their complex and diverse interpersonal relations. So this tenet of systemic functional linguistics is based on the claim that a speaker not only talks about something but is always talking to and with others. So, language not only construes experience but simultaneously acts out the interpersonal encounters that are essential to our survival. Next, modality is there for the grammar of explicit comment, and it includes signals of the varying degrees of certainty we have about the propositions we express and the sorts of commitment or obligation that we attach to our utterances. So, a useful way of fleshing out this rather abstract definition of modality, and in a way that helps align it with the concept of psychological point of view. It is to consider some alternative types of models patterning in a short sample narrative. So there are three invented mini stories that serve as a useful purpose in sketching some basic concepts in modality and style. With all disclaimers delivered, consider the first version. In the Heathrow cafeteria, what a nuisance! The Bali London to Tanis flight had been delayed. Quell surprise. The Tani sheepishly attributed this to the late arrival of an incoming flight. Fog is normally the problem at this time of year. I needed a robust coffee, so I felt I had to confront the busy cafeteria. A lone waitress patrolled the tables. What it be? She asked, harassed. Strong coffee, please, I replied. Her face tightened in a way that registered the request as unreasonable. She eventually brought to me, in a flowery mug, a pale gray liquid which I understood was to pass for filtered coffee. So, this is a homodygetic narrative where actions and events are relayed through a first person participating narrator. The homodygetic narrative is delivered by a story, or character, or someone actively involved in the narrative. Usually, he then uses the first person pronoun in his address, but not always. He may be the protagonist or just a bit of player, but he is somehow affecting or affected by the actions going on the story. So, so much is obvious, but it is the manner by which these actions and events are relayed that is rather more significant here. So the narrator of this statement tells you not only what happens but also what he thinks. Throughout, interpretations and interpolations are offered as to why events unfold in the way they do, with the narrator cooperatively orientating what they say towards an implied reader. And also, this text embodies a particular type of modal framework, which in narrative discourse is marked by certain key expressions. So, the narrator, for example, expresses clearly their own desires, duty, obligations, and opinions in relation to events and other characters. I needed a coffee. I felt I had to confront the busy cafeteria, and so on. Notice also that the narrator of this statement and this self analysis is not to suggest any graph in its creation. It employs a generic sentence in the sequence: fog is normally the problem at this time of year. So, this key marker of narratorial modality, which is always expressed through the timeless, simple present tense. It also allows the narrator confidently to represent what they say as a universal truth. The text is also rich in what Aspensky 1973 calls verba sentiendi. These are words denotating thoughts, feelings, and perceptions as embodied in mental processes like I felt or I understood. So overall, the text is dominated by clearly articulated personal interpretations or felt experience, where the narrator makes sense of the experience before relying to it. Let us adopt the term positive shading for this type of model pattern. In the Heathrow cafeteria, the London of Tony's flight must have been delayed because the Tony said something about the late arrival of another flight. Perhaps it was fog. I must have been hungry or maybe thirsty because I found myself in a large, busy room whose appearance suggested it was a cafeteria. A woman in the attire of a waitress patrolled in the tables. "What it be?" she asked, as if harassed by my presence. "Strong coffee, please," I seem to recall saying. Her face tightened as though she found my request unreasonable. She eventually brought to me, in a flowery mug, a pale gray liquid which must have been filtered coffee. So, the overall interpersonal dynamic of this piece of narrative is very different from the previous. This is a narrator who tries to make sense of the world around him, but does so with only limited success. His account is marked by epistemic modality, which refers to the system of modal markers used by signaling judgments of belief, certainty, or truth. Epistemic modality works in principally in example number 2 foreground the narrator's efforts to interpret and make sense of what he sees a lot and hears. So the flight must have been delayed, perhaps it was fog, and so on. So the passage is also rich in words of estrangement, which reinforce the narrator's seemingly uncertainty about what is going on around him. A consequence of this is that description tends to rely on the narrator's interpretation of external appearance. So notice how it is the appearance of the room which suggests it was a cafeteria, and the woman's attire that suggests she was a waitress. In the Heathrow cafeteria, the London of Tani's flight had been delayed. The Tani referred to the late arrival of an incoming flight. I went into a cafeteria. A woman patrolled the tables. "What it be?" she said. "Strong coffee, please," I said. Her face tightened. She eventually brought me a mug or coffee. So this version is characterized by anything a marked absence of narratorial modality. It is constructed entirely from categorical assertions, that is to say, from raw propositions which have no trace of explicit modal comment because they are stripped of modality. Categorical assertions are in a certain respect non negotiable. And the removal of interpersonal markers in example number 3 explains, in part, why it is much shorter than the first two versions. In this type of model framework, the narrator withholds subjective evaluation in favor of an ostensibly more neutral descriptions of events. So, straightforward physical descriptions dominates, while there is little or no attempt at any psychological development or interpretation. In the Heathrow cafeteria, the London of Tanny's flight must have been delayed because the Tanny said something about the late arrival of another flight. Perhaps it was fog. Simpson must have been hungry, or maybe thirsty, because he found himself in a large busy room whose appearance suggested it was a cafeteria. A woman in the attire of a waitress patrolled the tables. "What it be?" she asked, as if harassed by his presence. "Strong coffee, please," he replied. Her face tightened as if she found his request unreasonable. She eventually brought to him, in a flowery mug, a pale gray liquid which must have been a filter coffee. So, in this version, the original narrator of version number 2 becomes a character within the story. A character who, in fact, occupies the role of reflector of fiction, while the new narrator is heterogenetic in the sense of being different from an external into the story. Although the negatively shaded modality follows the transposition, the source of the epistemic warrant for what is narrated is now less clear. Is it reflector of fiction who is bewildered vocalizer here, or is the external non-participating narrator, or is it even some combination of both? So both of the other original versions can be similarly transposed so that the same modality carries over into the third person framework. So again, the same questions are raised about where the source of the modal comment should be situated. Basically, the third person framework offers two options: either align the modality with the external narrator or locate in the viewpoint of the character reflector. This means that the point of view model becomes a little more complex when applied specifically to the third person mode because it offers two variants for each of the three model possibilities. So, it also means that there is considerable scope for ambiguity and sometimes for irony. In this mode, because we are often less certain about whose point of view exactly is being relied in the third person narratives. This means that the point of view model becomes a little more complex when applied specifically to the third person mode because it offers two variants for each of the three model possibilities. So, it also means that there is considerable scope for ambiguity and sometimes for irony. In this mode, because we are often less certain about whose point of view exactly is being relied in the third person narratives. Next is modality and psychological point of view. This subunit outlines some practical activities that follow from the point of view rewrite exercise undertaken. Before going on to consider some of the implications of the exercise for passages of real fiction, it will be worth recapping upon and tidying up the three basic types of modal pattern. So first is positive shading. This is a narrative modality where the narrator's desires, duties, obligations, and opinions of events are foregrounded. The deontic model of system is prominent and the narrative is rich in generic sentences and in verba sentiendi, or words denotating thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Positive shading is perhaps the most common point of view modality, underpinning a great many first and third person fictional works. So next is negative shading. This is a narrative modality where an often bewildered narrator or character relies on external signals and appearances to sustain a description. So, the epistemic model system is foregrounded, and the narrative is rich in words of estrangement. The narrator's uncertainty about events and about other characters' motivation is often expressed through structures based on human perception. So, negative shading often characterizes existentialist or Gothic styles of narrative fiction. Next is neutral shading. This style is characterized by complete absence of territorial modality and is typified by categorical assertions where the narrator withholds subjective evaluations and interpretations. So this type of shading often comprises neutral physical description at the expense of psychological development. Neutral shading embodies the principle of objective realism in fiction, and it corresponds to what narratologist Jeanette 1980 and Raymond Kennan 1983 have called external focalization. Given the often sparse field this mode engenders, narrative written entirely in a neutrally shaded modality are rare. So it is possible for a literary text to shift from one pattern to another, even while a particular pattern dominates overall. So I won't include the passages anymore, but the passages are not ordered in any particular or significant sequence, and the only thing to bear in mind is that there are present at least two representatives of each of the three categories of modal shading. As you work through each passage, these are the guidelines. So first is identify as far as you can tell the narrative mode in which the passage is written. That is say whether it is first person or third person. Number two, identify the dominant type of modal shading in each passage. Do not try to analyze the passage on a sentence by sentence basis, but rather pick out the modal framework which best describes the passage as a whole. Highlight any of the telltale devices that help confirm your interpretation. Number three, if you identify a passage as a third person, try to work out whether its modality, like the attitudes, opinions, and belief it expresses, it comes from an external heterogenetic narrator who is situated outside the story, or from an individual character, a reflector of fiction, who is situated inside the story. Lastly, wherever feasible, think of the stylistic impact of both the narrative mode and the point of view framework that each writer has chosen. What would happen if either the narrative mode or the particular modal shading were altered?